the changes in the podcasting and content industry. If you want your content to do a lot of the heavy lifting and the work, we have to put in a little bit more intention of like, okay, what are the actual problems that we're solving? In what format can we solve this?
People need to believe that you're interesting. And for them to believe that you're interesting, you need to learn how to communicate your ideas in creative ways.
How can I actually bridge the gap between this content and revenue? What are the problems that we're trying to solve? What are the questions that we're trying to answer for our customers?
Especially people that like to repurpose podcast content. The reason they do it is because they don't want to work too much on their content, right?
Test your systems out. Is this content actually delivering what I want for the business, right? Other than views and likes and subscribers or whatever.
And it is challenging to differentiate yourself when the content looks very similar from the other person.
The reason like this industry is changing so much is because guys, welcome back to Content is Profit. We are back in the studio. Fonzie, how was your vacation in Fort Myers?
It was very nice.
Very nice.
I went fishing till 2 a.m. in the morning and we met this guy that he caught 2 sharks. It was pretty epic. Pretty epic.
Yeah, that's peak Florida there.
Peak Florida, indeed. He actually also, the day before he shows the video, he caught an 8-foot sawfish. It was massive.
Wow.
Yep.
Picture of it doesn't exist.
Well, he had the video because it's illegal to bring those in. So he had to let it go.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that you're back, man. I'm glad that we're carpooling here to the studio. I'm not glad the reason why. You don't have to share it. But, finally we get to hang out a little bit,
That is true.
Let's go. Because even though we work together, it feels like sometimes we don't hang out at all.
That is true as well.
And now that you have a fiance, we don't hang out at all more.
Hey, so much love in there. Those relationships, they take a lot of work, a lot of intention. So.
Anyways, enough of our private life. Today, I think I have an interesting topic. Fonzie does not know what we're talking about today, but I had an interesting conversation with a CEO of a company. They're a media company. They do something really similar. And we connected because I was very interested in the email side of, the tool that we use to communicate with our customers and to kind of keep conversations going, right? And we ended up talking about the changes in the podcasting and content industry. They're going through, some changes. They're rethinking the whole offer. We're also rethinking our entire offer, right?
Indeed.
We actually have something that's like really attached to revenue. It's juicy. We haven't announced it yet. This is going to be out for like a beta group initially. And we can't wait to bring this out. But it made me think. There's a lot of, studios out there or production companies. And we talked about this, like content being commoditized, right? So if you're listening right now, you produce content for somebody else, or you're in that production world, right? Or even if you are looking to hire somebody, you probably, some of these stuff, you probably thought about this, right? So, Fonzie, I want to ask you, right, before I tell you with that, the conclusion that we came out of that conversation, more of a collaborative conversation. What are your thoughts on content today, on podcasting and short form, clipping, specifically on podcasts?
This thought, literally, as you were talking right now, I was like, it's interesting, because obviously we believe in content 100%, but like you said, it's commoditized, right? Like you can find a video editor here that does the same quality work as a video editor somewhere else in the other side of the world, and they do it for
a fraction of the cost.
And that's just because of the circumstances where they live, right? Like maybe salaries in their country are, way lower than they are here in the States. So I was thinking, for some people, especially people that go and hire agencies, right, that outsource some of this work, they see it more as an expense, right? And the challenge is that when you're a video editor coming in, you're not really too attached to revenue in those companies. So, unfortunately, you're disposable. Like whenever the company goes through something, a challenging time, you're going to be probably one of the first people they're going to be like, well, here's the door. Thank you for your services, right? But the other side of the coin is there's a lot of companies that truly build on content and believe in content.
Yeah.
But I feel for those people, it makes no sense to also outsource that so they bring it in-house.
Yeah.
Right. Which is when I believe that's the position where the editor, right, the producers, that's where they want to be, right? I think they want to come in-house with somebody because it's going to give them more security at the end of the day. But when we're talking about, multi-purposing content for podcasts and stuff like that, there's just so much volume right now. And it is challenging to differentiate yourself when the content looks very similar from the other person. Let's talk about differences when you're looking, at a podcast content. The set, it's a difference, but, body position, people talking, that is the same thing, right? Maybe obviously you got topics. Once people start listening, you can differentiate yourself a little bit about topics. There's topics that get more interest than others, right? Again, if you're talking about something topical, pop culture, you're on the news, a political podcast, something that is top of mind for people day in and day out, you're probably going to gain a little bit of more success. People are probably going to be willing to give you more of that 1 minute of attention to see what you have to say. But if your podcast is a business podcast, right, that mainly you talk about, evergreen principles, right? Same thing over and over. There's a lot of repetition.
Yeah.
You're probably I think you have to accept that you will get less views, right? It's a smaller niche. The other factor is personalities. Maybe you can bring a guest on that is huge, right? And you can leverage that for more views. Then the challenge becomes, okay, well, I need to retain the attention of these people as well. So do I keep bringing big, guests? And ideally, obviously, you want to bring great, incredible guests to your podcast. But sometimes it is challenging, especially if maybe you don't have the exposure, right? Because they want something in return. Nobody's just going to come in on your podcast for free. So it is a challenge, right? I think there is some sort of lack of creativity inside of the podcast content. I do believe that personality is one of the differentiators, the number one differentiators that you have. And you have to become extremely good at the way you communicate. Because if you truly become a master of communicating ideas, people are going to willing to listen, right? If you are able to answer to somebody else's question with a sort of one-liner headline followed by a quick story and, a proof, claims, etc., right? You might be more inclined to get people's attention rather than some people that just jump on the podcast and just talk forever. There's no structure to what they're saying. So I think that is number one, the differentiator. Now, if you have, some sort of creative director or you have the bandwidth to do this yourself, you can enhance podcast content by creating a rhetoric, right? By creating some sort of context around a piece of content. Say we just grab the moment that I just mentioned about, hey, you need to learn how to speak on headlines, and bite-sized stories. And then we can clip that and I can create something that creates context, that create more curiosity, open loops and transitions into that clip, sharing the lesson. I think that is a way to enhance the podcast content. Yeah. But again, that takes work. That takes bandwidth, right? Not something that people are willing to do, especially people that like to repurpose podcast content. The reason they do it is because they don't want to work too much on their content, right? The reason they do the multi-purposing is because, I create something in long form and then I already have a whole bunch of other content that I can put out there and I don't have to deal with it and I can go and put my focus in something else on my business.
Which, by the way, has its benefits and it really depends on where you're at in that creator journey, right?
Yeah.
And I think, for... we talked about this, a content ecosystem point of view type of deal where, you have your long form, which is the objective is very different than your short form, right? And if you want to leverage your time a little bit more, you can maybe go into that multi-purposing aspect. But, one of the things that I had here is, we're talking with this guy this morning was where which ones are the content layers, right? Because you could have your main show, then you have your clips that create awareness, like you keep you in front of it. And I think we've lived that, firsthand in our industry when we go to live events. People are like, oh, I'm seeing you guys everywhere. And I'm like, where do you guys see us? And they're like, oh yeah, on social, I see your clips kind of popping up. And maybe they don't consume the entire clip, but it keeps you relevant in your industry, right?
Yeah,
and
that is an advantage.
And that has a lot of value, because that point of contact, then let's say you want to continue developing that relationship, it does really help. We've had cases where they've seen that, then we continue the conversation and it turns out to be a really good opportunity on the back end for the business. But now also, if you want your content to do a lot of the heavy lifting and the work for you as well, then we have to put in a little bit more intention of like, okay, what are the actual problems that we're solving? In what format can we solve this? Is that like is that like a 5-minute, 8-minute YouTube video with different storylines or different things, right? Or if we're talking, if we assume that we have 2 buckets, right? The entertaining bucket and then the educational bucket. Where is this content going to fit, right? Based on your business, probably on the educational side of things. What are the problems that we're trying to solve? What are the questions that we're trying to answer for our customers? Is that really the format that's needed? Like maybe it's not a podcast episode, but maybe it's a short 1-minute clip with visuals walking people through the process, for example, right? So I think like we have to be like very, very aware to what are the formats that we're putting these ideas and what are the layers that we can put in based on your own capacity, your production team, and your so on. So the reason like this industry is changing so much is because obviously, if clips or short form content was not successful, then we would not have the issue of a lot of people trying to create this type of stuff and competing for that. So as a business, like let's say you have a production business, let's say you have you are a video editor, right? Like what are some things that you can add value to it? And over the last like 2-3 years, that's a question that me and Fonzie internally for our company have been trying to ask, right? Like, what are the things that we can add value to the point that we ended up, purchasing a whole other business as a podcast studio because, for a layer of our customer base, it can be a value add to come here and record high quality content, for example, right? That, opened a whole different stream of income, for example. But again, what are the other things? And the new step in that direction for us, at least, is to make this very incredible offer that is really tied to revenue, because a lot of people start creating content. They have the belief that yes, it's going to become profit, it's going to become revenue, right? But as soon as like the content starts flowing out, then there's a disconnect between the content and the profit system or the revenue system that they might have in there. And there's a big question mark right in the middle of like, how do we actually turn this content into profit? Yeah. And I think like that's the gap that a lot of like these individual video creators or individual producers of clippers or whatever that can be like very, very inexpensive online. Once you satisfy that itch of, oh, I have my content out, there's the next question today is like, how do I actually now connect these clips to the revenue, right? And that's as a business, we need to be making revenue to be able to do that. So I highly encourage you guys to, test your systems out, do a real audit. Like, where are you sitting? Like, is this content actually delivering what I want for the business, right? Other than views and likes and subscribers or whatever, right? And then from there, start asking, good questions like, how can I actually bridge the gap between this content and revenue? You have your book in there. What's going on?
As we were talking, I got reminded of this quote that I read here in this book. The book is called "Hey Whipple, Squeeze This." It's a copywriting book about advertising, but I think this relates so much to what we're talking about, right? And this was said by one of kind of these founders of advertising agency and one of the father of like creative advertising before everything was like data led. And, before he came on as an advertiser, the scene of advertising was just putting an image in front of the consumer, right? Like it was pretty much, they were pretty much, underestimating the consumer and just saying, if we put whatever we put in front of them, they'll consume and then they'll come in and purchase, right? Again,
and like if you build it, they'll come.
Yeah, this was around the 50s. This guy started his agency, I think, in the 60s. But again, before that, also there was way less competition. So in the 60s, more companies, right after, the World War and like the US started to, flourish, become economically stronger. There were more companies, more products. And this guy came in and he said the truth isn't the truth until people believe you. And they can believe you if they don't know what you're saying. And they can know what you're saying if they don't listen to you. And they won't listen to you if you're not interesting. And you won't be interesting unless you say things imaginatively, originally, freshly. Right? And I think that is one, like that just relates so much to today, right? Like change the advertising per se on this, in the 50s and 60s for content, right? At first, the first people that came into the game, they got first movers advantage, right? Let's say Gary Vee, he was just publishing so much content, a very specific type of content. People started consuming that. Obviously, he built a massive audience.
Another example of that is like when a new platform comes up,
you got first movers advantage.
They get the traction.
But then eventually all the competition starts coming in, all the noise, right? Content starts looking the same. There's a trend. Everybody copies it, right?
You want the Hormozy videos?
And then it's very difficult, right? It's very challenging for you, like, wow, like people to raise their hands and consume your video. And I think this quote just illustrates it perfectly, right? You want people to listen to you. People need to believe that you're interesting. And for them to believe that you're interesting, you need to learn how to communicate your ideas in creative ways, right? And creative ways doesn't mean I'm gonna jump off an airplane and talk about business, a podcast while jumping out of an airplane. Who knows? Maybe that'll be pretty cool. It might catch people's attention. But, you can save things creatively sitting down in here, right? And you can use some props to help you out. Or maybe you can, I'm referring to the very beginning.
Or we can ask really good questions.
Or we can add context after the fact that we do the clip, right? And we can, expand on the idea, on the stories. Again, there's many different ways, but most people with their lazy mindset, they don't do that, right? And in reality is, all right, I got a long form, here it is, just multi-purpose it and slap it out there. Sure. Again, it has its purpose. I do agree it has its purpose, especially there's people that they monetize their podcast mostly by their relationship they're building with the guest. So if that is your model, perfect. You're monetizing already. Like your multi-purpose content is second for you, right? It's more like an added benefit at that point where you're kind of like reaching a little bit more eyeballs, giving value to your guests because you're showing them off to other people.
There's definitely tactics, right? And you mentioned, the laziness. And I think maybe some people in the market are being lazy, right? Or they think they might be, smart. But also there's also a lot of business owners and people out there that are, maybe that's the model that they can either afford or that's the time that they might have, right? Which, we were at that point too, where like we did a time audit and it was, hey, we have 2 hours a week. How can we maximize this one time?
I'm going to challenge that.
But hold on.
Fancy challenge.
But also, like, there's tactically things that, like you say, on the leverage side, right, that they can help you. Like, for example, we had Ina come into the studio, right? She rented a studio from Boston. Amazing. She did a bunch of interviews. We were one of those. And then we interviewed her in our show and we started like putting the content out there, making her a collaborator because we know like on Instagram, she is something like that. And she sends a message back. She's like, oh my God, guys, I love this. Thank you so much. Like I'm loving the content. I'm sharing it. I'm going to do that with all my guests. I don't do that with all my guests, right? And it's because in that specific platform, that specific tactic, when people accept, it shows in their profile. So that's a point of leverage. Yes, that maybe not everybody can do. But like I said, it could be one of those like little tactics. What I'm challenging people to do right now is like maybe we're seeing the content map and the strategy like way too close. And it's like, how can we step back like 3-4 steps and be like, perfect. That is part of it, right? Based on your capacity and resources. And those are like individual tactics, but that's not the whole strategy, right? That's just a piece of it. All right. Challenge accepted.
My challenge is that first, my belief is that people should be trying to make their content better every single time, right? Now, if you're somebody with limited bandwidth and you're picking an option just because it allows you to not consume so much of that bandwidth, I would argue, is that even the right option, right? Because at the end, obviously, depending on their goals, and we're making goal here, profit, right? If they got very limited bandwidth, I'm going to assume that they're probably in a tighter spot in their business, right? They're probably working a lot inside of their business, right? Rather than on their business. They probably have very limited time to market their products, their services. And that's why they probably want to expand their reach. And multi-purposing content from a long form does sound very enticing to expand the reach. But again, I would argue, is that the best way to go about leveraging the bandwidth that you have at the moment, right? I think a good example is how we started. Sure, we were multi-purposing it at first, but actually what got us better results was the 45 Live, right? At first, 45 Live. And then when we started Content is Profit, the fact that we were live streaming Content is Profit on Facebook, right? People were watching those and they were seeing those and then they were reaching out to us. So my argument was mostly, is that the necessary part, right? I just want to invite you listening right now, if you find yourself in that position, to think, okay, well, where are my efforts going to have the best yield? Because at the end of the day, if I place my efforts, I might feel like I'm working the hardest. But if it's giving zero results, does it really make sense to keep doing that, right? And I mean, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, right? So look at your situation. Again, I do believe 100% content is profit, right? I think the challenge is to finding which way you can tie your content into profit. For people that are tight on bandwidth, I personally believe 45 Live, right? Something intentional where you're tackling a specific problem and then directing people to how they can solve it and how you can, help them realize you're the one that can solve them. I think that's an easier option. It might actually take 5 minutes a day, right? Rather than a full hour podcast a week, resource wise, that actually seems a little bit better, right? So that's just my challenge. Again, there is definitely a spot for multi-purposing and clipping, right? There's definitely ways that you can enhance multi-purposing and clipping. And there's also strategies where regular base, what we call tier C, multi-purposing and clipping, actually makes sense as well. Right? There's not a one size fits all strategy at the end of the day. You need to look rationally at your business and say, what is going to give me the best yield?
Yeah, I think you as a business owner, right, or content creator or entrepreneur, you have to make a decision. It's like, what is my baseline consistency, right? And that might mean a Facebook Live a day. That might mean one episode of podcast a week, right? That might mean a podcast episode plus a few clips, right? And, that 80-20 rule that we've talked about so many times where, 80% of that is the standard, right? And then that 20% capacity to test new things, right? Like we had this show for the longest time. I think they just turned 1 year old and it was just a weekly episode, right? And because of certain reasons, budget limitations and maybe technology limitations, they're a little older guys. They cannot maybe leverage media like they want to leverage, right? So guess what? The next step for them was clipping. And guess what? The YouTube channel has grown quite a bit since they did that. And like Fonzie said, it's tier C clipping, is one clip a day, not super highly edited. It's iconic moments in the episode. And those are things that a tool with an AI clipper can help you do and give you some data, right? And see what's happening. And then if that becomes your standard, like Fonzie said, going along those lines based on your capacity, resources, budget, and objective as well, because, if the objective is revenue, but these clips are not driving revenue, then what are we doing, right? If the objective is, let's direct traffic to the YouTube channel, and the goal is to grow that YouTube channel because that becomes an asset or whatever, right? Then yes, every week, what can we do to get better? And that goes from getting better at your message, getting better at asking questions, getting better at maybe portraying polarizing ideas, getting better at, getting better guests, right? There are all these things within the podcast environment, but let's say it's not a podcast and it's a Facebook Live, right? Well, what are elements that within the 5-minute container of a Facebook Live that we can do better? Well, maybe it's the environment, is the place that I record, maybe is, how I synthesize the idea, or maybe it's how I craft the hook to that 5-minute video, right? Or there's so many things that you can do better within one format, right? And I think people are like excited to get their content up and running, and also confused because there's so many options, right? And that was us. We spent like 3 years before we actually launched the podcast, and we found the podcast to be our vehicle for consistency, right? And then it evolved into something like really cool. So again, try to step back 2-3 steps and be like, okay, what is the thing based on my capacity, resources, budget, right? And with your goal in mind, and also your drive. Like, why are you creating content? There's people that, create content that might not be attached to a business, but they're super passionate, and that's a vehicle for them to help the content itself, right? So there's all these elements. And if you step 2 or 3 steps back, then you can maybe look at it with a more objective point of view and make better decisions.
Nice.
Any last thoughts, Fonzie?
Nope. Let's get out of here.
Let's get out of here. You're falling asleep.
I'm just ready. I'm ready to keep doing some work.
Here we go. Guys, with that said, hey, hold on.
That was weak.
Yeah, that was weak. Here we go. Guys, with that said, thank you so much for tuning to the Contents Profit Podcast. Go ahead and follow the show in your favorite podcasting platform and on social media at Biz Bros Co.
That is right. If today's episode helped you move one step closer towards creating better content that is tied to your profit, please don't forget to share this episode and leave a 5-star review. See ya.
Bye, guys.